Hello everyone, I'm Brian. Today I'm reacting to What Happens at Death. Travel of the subtile body according to Advaita Vedanta. I thought it was actually named a little bit different. What happens after death. Anyways, let's go ahead and get started. Oh nice! He hasn't gotten to mine yet. I can't wait. I don't know if it's a good one or not, so it's probably like a terrible question I ask. Anyways.
Welcome to our question and answer series. I received this question from Vasanta Kumar, who lives in Chennai. He asks, after death, what happens to the sukshma sharira, the subtle body, for someone who has attained moksha, liberation, enlightenment? That's a great question, and it brings up several related topics for us to discuss. First of all, what happens to your body and mind at death? Well, if you die of natural causes, your breathing stops first, and that deprives the organs in your body of oxygen, causing them to shut down one by one. But surprisingly, your brain will continue to function for just a few more minutes before it too shuts down. People who were lucky enough to be revived during those few minutes report various kinds of near-death experiences, like traveling through a dark tunnel towards a distant source of light. But if you're not revived in those crucial few minutes, your brain will soon cease to function, and all the activities of your mind will stop. It's interesting to imagine what those last moments might feel like. First of all, your surroundings will fade away from your awareness, including the loved one holding your hand. Then you lose awareness of your body. Finally, your last thought will fade from awareness. And then what? Well, according to the rishis, the sages of ancient India, you'll actually continue being aware. You'll be aware of the complete absence of any physical sensations or mental activities, like standing in a perfectly dark closet with your eyes wide open. You don't lose your power of sight in the closet. You can see, but there's nothing to be seen.
I do wonder, how did they come up with this? Like, how do you know without experiencing this? Did one of the rishis just so happens to may have had that a similar experience where they're dying and then revived at the last second or last few seconds?
In the same way, at death, you don't cease to be aware, but there's nothing left to be aware of. The ancient rishis discovered that your true essential nature is awareness, pure consciousness, consciousness that's eternal, never-ending. They called it Atma, the true self, the inner divinity that exists independently of your body and mind. That consciousness existed before your birth and continues to exist after death. That consciousness makes you aware of everything that's happening right now. And at night, when you're dreaming, it makes you aware of everything happening in your mind. Then, in deep, dreamless sleep, it makes you aware of the absence of any thoughts, emotions, or sensations. There's a surprising similarity between deep sleep and death. From the standpoint of experience, the two states are indistinguishable. In both states, you remain aware of nothing, aware of silence and stillness. Now, What would happen if your consciousness actually did cease to exist during deep sleep? That means your essential nature would somehow dissolve or fade away. If that were so, falling asleep might feel like sinking into a dark abyss of utter non-existence, a state of total annihilation. And you'd probably be afraid to fall asleep. Fortunately, that's not what happens. We all love deep, dreamless sleep. It's a state of awareful silence, a state of blissful contentment, a state of perfect peace. And there is no reason to assume that the experience of being dead would be any different.
I do wonder about people who go in a coma or unconscious. Like, what is their state of mind during those times? I think I haven't really looked into too much of this. I do remember seeing it some time ago that there is a clinical thing when someone's considered to be brain dead, when there's no activities in the brain. Then they're considered to be brain dead, even though the body's still breathing. I don't remember if it's through assisted breathing or whether the body's breathing on its own. But I wonder what he would say about these, like, coma, people who are in a coma for so many years, people who may be clinically brain dead. Again, I have not, my YouTube recommendation hasn't recommended that, but Google's always listening, so maybe something will pop up in my home feed, something with comas and brain dead people or something like that, just to see what's going on. Like, have scientists really studied up on these things? I know there is some, due to the fact that obviously they have to monitor people in these things, in these conditions. I don't remember if I've heard anyone come to life when they're considered brain dead, but then all of a sudden wake up from that. I'm not sure. I may have heard one case, but I'm not really sure. Again, it's been a very long time, 1 or 2 videos, and that was about it. So it's something that's very interesting.
But then, what about reincarnation? What is it that leaves the body at death and travels on to be reborn? That's what Vasanta Kumar asked about in his question. According to the doctrine of karma, it's the sukshma sharira, or subtle body, that leaves the physical body at death and acquires a new one. The subtle body is the source of the prana, or energy, that enlivens your physical body. It also endows you with various faculties, like the power to walk and talk, the ability to see, hear, taste, smell, and touch, and all the faculties of your mind. At death, after the subtle body departs, the physical body is left lifeless and inert. If you're unfamiliar with these teachings, you might find it helpful to watch my video on reincarnation. You can find a link below. An important question should be asked here. After death, the physical body decays into the physical elements from which it was made. So then, why doesn't the subtle body also decay? Decay into the subtle elements from which it was made. Well, according to the doctrine of karma, whoever commits an action must eventually receive the results, even if death intervenes. That means the doer or agent of action must survive death to reap any results that have not yet come about. But then, who is the agent of action that survives death?
Real quick with that one, I remember watching in his karma video, he talks about an infinite number of karmas, good and bad, that you have. So does that mean whether you'd like to be doomed to be reborn always, or whether you consider to be doomed or to be not doom, that we're always going to be reborn because we have infinite number of good and bad karmas, at least according to what Swami here has said in his karma video, if I remember correctly, because there's an infinite birth and rebirth, death and rebirth cycles, and I can't remember if he talked about how. Anyways, he talks about I believe an infinite rebirth cycles and death and rebirth, and because there's an infinite death and rebirth, there's an infinite amount of karma that you have, so you're always going to be reborn. So I guess there's I was waiting for him to get to the enlightened portion, because what happens if you become enlightened? Do you now escape karma?
Who is the doer? Obviously, it's not your physical body. The body is just an instrument that does what it's commanded to do. Nor is the agent of action Atma, the true self. Atma is pure consciousness, eternal and unchanging. It can't perform action on its own. It simply makes you aware of actions, the actions that are commanded by your mind. So, the agent of action must be part of your mind. And because your mind is part of the subtle body, at death, the subtle body is preserved from decaying by the laws of karma. Some kind of karmic glue, so to speak, ensures that the agent of action will survive death and reap the results of actions in a future life. According to the teachings of Vedanta, the agent of action is the one who says, I did it. And who is that? It's your ego, the so-called little I. It's the voice in your mind that says, I am. Ego is a thought, a peculiar thought that pretends to be your true self. In Sanskrit, it's called ahankara, literally the I maker. It's the ego that commands your body to act and directs the activities of your mind. Before gaining enlightenment, it's natural to assume that the voice in your mind that says, I am, is who you really are. You identify yourself with the ego rather than identifying yourself with pure consciousness. The consciousness that actually makes you aware of that voice in your mind. Now we're ready to answer Vasanta Kumar's question. After death, what happens to the sukshma sharira, the subtle body, for someone who has attained enlightenment? Enlightenment is the result of discovering that your true self, Atma, is pure consciousness and not an agent of action. When you're enlightened, you'll know that the agent of action who commands your body and directs your mind is the ego, a mere thought that says, I am. For an enlightened person, the ego is negated. It's nullified or falsified. In Vedanta texts, the falsified ego is said to be like a dagdha bija, a burnt seed. When mustard or cumin seeds are roasted, they still exist, but they can no longer germinate. In the same way, when the ego is falsified, it still exists, but it can no longer produce karma, nor can it reap the results of past actions. Since a falsified ego cannot reap the results of past actions, the laws of karma will no longer preserve the sukshma sharira with the ego from decaying after death. In a manner of speaking, the powerful karmic glue has nothing it can stick to. So, just as the physical body returns to physical elements after death, an enlightened person's subtle body will return to subtle elements.
Well, he answered my question right then and there.
When the Sukshma Sharira no longer exists, there's no possibility of rebirth, no possibility of suffering again in a future life. Then one continues to remain in blissful silence, in perfect peace. Now, here's a related question from Animesh, who lives in West Bengal. He asks, what will happen if every single person in the world gains liberation? His question is based on part of the doctrine of karma that says, just like a person undergoes a cycle of life, death, and rebirth due to karma, in the same way, the entire universe undergoes a cycle of creation and dissolution due to karma. The karma that drives the cycle of creation is called samashti karma, the collective karma of all living beings. Each new cycle of creation begins when it's triggered by samashti karma. And then, after all that karma has been exhausted, the universe enters a state of dissolution and remains in an unmanifest condition until the next cycle begins. So the question is, if every person alive today became enlightened, and all their karmas had no effect whatsoever because their egos had been burnt up like seeds, then would this cycle of creation come to an end? Well, every kind of living being has karma, not just human beings. The karmas of all the animals, birds, and fish alive today would still exist, and those karmas would keep the universe from undergoing dissolution. But really speaking, it's not possible for every single living person to gain enlightenment. In the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna says that 1 person in 1,000 strives for liberation, and among those who strive, perhaps 1 in 1,000 actually gains liberation. If you'd like to submit a question for a future video like this one, please send it to me at the email address shown later. Be sure to indicate video question in the subject line.
Okay, so he did answer my question. And I guess it seems maybe impossible for everyone to be enlightened. Given enough time, perhaps. Interestingly enough, for some weird reason, I end up watching a video on YouTube about decline of population. They talk about, well, in that video they talked about South Korea, Japan, America, and I think Europe for the most part. Very brief. It's just an interesting. He goes around asking questions about it, and well, if we're in a population decline, eventually there's not going to be enough people. I don't know. I don't know how that's going to work. Well, I guess more animals will be thriving if there's less humans. So I suppose, those who don't become enlightened will either be born as human or I'm not sure. I haven't really studied up too much in terms of where you're at in terms of whether you're human or become an animal or whatnot. But anyways, I submitted a question to him. If you want to, please do. I'm curious. I'll be reacting to his videos, of course, after they're 30 days old. Can't wait till he answers mine. I don't know. Again, I don't know if it's a good one or not, but I threw it out there. I'm kind of curious about it. So anyways, that's my reaction to what happens at death, travels of the subtle body according to Advaita Vedanta. If you like my content, please consider subscribing, thumbs up, thumbs down below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next vid.